Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. As always, support the podcast. Best way you can do that is by becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack. We conduct off-the-record Zoom calls with members to shoot the breeze on world events, and I produce a weekly analysis of the news. You can purchase a consult if you want to chat with me about anything you like. You can donate through the website. I got a bunch of affiliates, and subscribe to Geopolitics and Empire wherever you find me on the socials, and leave podcast reviews wherever you listen to or watch the podcast. Joining us for the first time is ex-con, successful entrepreneur and CEO and author Rick Culleton of culleton.com. The link is in the description. His book is titled Messed Up Like You, How ADHD and Anxiety Didn't Stop Me from Becoming a Successful Entrepreneur. Welcome to the podcast, Rick.
Thanks for having me.
We were talking a bit about life in Latin America before we hit record, which was interesting, but we'll get to that a bit later on. And so, you know, you've got your book, you've got quite the life. You had trouble early on, which you talk about in your book. Could you tell us a bit about your travails before the light began to shine at the end of the tunnel, or early on in your life?
I'm still following the light, but it started as a pretty typical rural childhood. I grew up out in the country. I had ADHD, and back then we called it ADD, and they had some other words they'd throw on the end of it with hyperactive disorder and some other terms. And teachers and people in general had a hard time with me. They couldn't decide. One year they put me in a classroom that was third and fourth grade together, thinking I was going to skip the fourth grade and go straight to the fifth the next year. And then the following year, when I was in the fourth grade, they thought I should do the fourth grade again. And they were all over the place. And, the teachers thought I was a handful. And, in a way, I think that I probably followed direction in that, when you get labeled underachiever and, all of these, you just tend to, as a child, you listen to what the adults say and you probably believe 90% of what they're telling you. And that's kind of the path I took. And it took no time at all. When I was 15, I was into some pretty serious trouble. I went to prison when I was 17. That ended my formal education. Did my time there, didn't last very long, got out and headed to Texas, and things kind of changed. They changed significantly. I met some different people there, some adults especially, who saw something different in me than the adults that I was around in central New York. I don't know why, but all of a sudden I started to feel like a different person. These folks had positive things to say, and people would tell me that they expected great things out of me. And I'm like, wow, is this, I look in the mirror, is this the same guy that they were talking to just a few months ago? And, life progressed from there. I think I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur of sorts. It started from a very young age. My father was first service manager, parts manager at a Ford dealership, and would come home very tired and dirty and angry every night. And then he had an opportunity when I was about 12 and became an entrepreneur, opened his own business. And he would come home every night very tired and very dirty and very happy. And it was a very different person. And he said one night at the dinner table, you'll never be happy working for someone else. I don't know if he was talking to me or the ether, but it sunk in, and I took that to heart. And when I got to Texas, it wasn't very long at all. I washed dishes and some things, but started looking for a path to entrepreneurship, not really knowing that was what I was doing, but just trying odd things here and there. Can I make some money doing this? Can I make some money doing that? And had a good time with it.
That's an important point. This is my first year, a little over a year now, working for myself, basically, and doing this podcast. And it's just as you say. It's better. It's difficult. It's you have many of the same problems being an employee, but you're free. I can say tomorrow I'm taking the day off or whatever. You don't have this intense pressure. And so I think whoever can should go out and try starting a business. And, I did want to ask you, I had a question, given the hard knocks early on for you. I've made some poor decisions in my life as well, and have ended up in bad situations, sometimes nothing to do of my own accord. But with some of these life events, I found, even if they were horrible, they actually in some ways made me better. And just one quick example, I've been held up at gunpoint. This was 20 years ago. I was the manager of a supermarket in North Chicago. And so, they stuck a gun in my face. I had to open the safe of the supermarket. They took the cash, and I've subsequently, when I was Peace Corps Mongolia, I was held up at knife point in Mongolia, and I got out of all of those situations, and they sort of I inadvertently ended up in Mexico, and so that was great training and preparation for Mexico, and it really made me a tougher and smart person afterward. And so, just do you have any thought on how evil can be used for good, and how maybe some of your bad experiences shaped you in a good way afterward?
Well, I don't think I've ever had a really good lesson come from good fortune. All of my best lessons come from the bad. Yeah, that's where everything is learned. I think that's I don't think that's appreciated enough. In that, when if you want to learn something, for instance, if you want to be an entrepreneur or whatever it is you want to do, you have to keep trying, and you're not going to be good at it in the beginning. I don't care, maybe there's a few exceptions to that rule, but it's going to take trial and error. And the way that you become better at what you're going to do is to fail. And was it Thomas Edison when we found 10,000 ways not to make it work? I mean, that's really how it goes, and you have to have those failures. I've got 3 very successful businesses, but I've got hundreds of failed businesses. They're littered. I found a box in a file cabinet the other day full of business cards. I put the picture up on social media. And those are just the ones that stayed around. There had to be 30 different business cards with my name on there, in a variety of things that were completely unrelated. And some of them I had entirely forgotten about. But they all had great lessons. I spent years in the car business, and that was probably my single biggest failure as an entrepreneur. I spent a lot of time there, much longer than I should have, and ended in bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy when I got all done. But the lessons I learned there were worth all of it.
That's that's some powerful advice, and something you mentioned as well when you got to Texas, the effect of having someone. When you're sort of down and out, or don't know what you want to do, but having someone there to egg you on. Because I've seen both examples where, when I was a younger person, sometimes I was trying to do something to break out of the mold, out of the box, and they say, "Don't, what are you doing? Stop doing that." Don't do. They don't. Instead of encouraging you, they're discouraging you. That can in some ways be fuel for you to egg on. You're like, "I'm going to prove you wrong," as well as the example that you had, where you had people sort of throwing at you these little pieces of inspiration to get you to keep going. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's a very important part, and there are a few of them that stick out in my life. And there's a lot of pivotal moments in my life, and one was the day that I got a job in a restaurant. And the reason that it's so important is because it turns out the manager of that restaurant ended up being my father-in-law. The bartender became my mother-in-law. The hostess became my wife, and so on. But the owner of that restaurant, Sid Tettons, a friend of mine, suggested I go there and apply, and I didn't have any experience waiting tables. And he said, "Rick, don't worry. They're your type of people. They're going to hire you. Just go there." So I went there. I didn't have a car, but I ended up going up there, and I interviewed with the owner. His name was Sid Tettons, and after just a few minutes, he says, "Son, I'm going to give you this job." He goes, "But I'm expecting a lot better out of you than working in a restaurant." And that was after just a few minutes of interaction with this guy. And I was 18 years old, and this was so contrary to what I had heard, but it was something that was starting to become more of the theme, in that the people at Pizza Hut that I worked for, even though I was washing pots and pans back there, were, "You really work hard. You're here every day on time." They didn't realize I was living there, but they're like, "You're here on time and you work really hard and you got a great attitude. We could use some more people like you." And that kind of thing has a lot to do with your underlying perception of yourself. You tend to reflect a lot of what other people are saying to you. And if somebody runs around and tells you that you're a useless piece of what all day long, every day, you're probably going to believe it over time. And I think the opposite is true. If people, tell you that you're going to do great things and become an incredible person, you probably will be.
Yeah, and one lesson even from listening to you is, one thing that's bothered me for the longest time is mediocrity, and the fact that we all are told you have to go to school, got to go to university, you got to do the 9 to 5 job. And then as soon as you want to break, even in my former workplaces, I was excelling, and I was actually told by supervisors, hey, tone it down. You're making everyone look mediocre. Everyone was mediocre. And it's just kind of like, I think one of the points that we have to strive to, whatever we like to do, but break out of the box. You don't have to do the 9 to 5, and maybe get your thoughts then on some of the businesses. People go to your website. You've got the Discount Electronics in Austin, the property, cash for your house in Austin, First Austin Property, your hotel in Costa Rica. You got your book. Your sort of transition into this space of entrepreneurship. One thing that comes to mind for me is grit, resilience, determination. As you mentioned already, learning, not being afraid to fail. When I lived in Kazakhstan, former communist country, the most shocking thing there was they are afraid. They will not make one step to do anything new. They are afraid of failure because it's that Soviet communist mentality. And in America, people are going to try new things. They're going to fail, like in your case, but it was just shocking to see in a society like Kazakhstan. No one will try anything new ever. And that's one of the reasons they don't advance, I think. And so just if you tell us about your transition to becoming a successful entrepreneur.
Your experience in Kazakhstan it's something I notice here in the US quite a bit, in that most of my friends, I would say 50% of my friends that are very successful entrepreneurs were not born in the United States. And when you come from some place that doesn't have the opportunities that we have here, when you walk into the US, it's like a candy store. It's like, I can do anything I want. I can open any business I want. And then a lot of these countries that these people come from, that's not the case. It's very limited into what you can do, if you can do anything at all. And I think that's why we see so many people who migrate to the US become such successful entrepreneurs. But, it's not for everybody. In the entrepreneurship, I've been quoted many times saying there's two types of people in the world: those who have stayed up all night long wondering how they're going to make payroll, and those who haven't. And I don't know, to be honest, that I would take this path again. I'm certainly glad that I did, and I wouldn't change anything in this life. But it has quite a toll. It's a completely dedicated life to, in that everything you do, the business is first. Whatever business you have, I've got 3 of them now. I've gotten better about putting my health before my businesses, but that's only come later in life. And if there's any young entrepreneurs listening out there, they're nodding their heads now. The sleepless nights and eating food out of your car and from a bag, and paying the rent for your business long before you make your own mortgage payment. I've had homes foreclosed on. I've filed personal bankruptcy. Entrepreneurship is not an easy journey by any stretch of the imagination.
There are just so many things there, but you do have that satisfaction, and then if you succeed again, one thing for me that is just amazing is that it's like you mean I can build this. I've been doing this for over a decade, Geopolitics and Empire, and just like you have this sort of pride that you did this on your own, that you built something versus doing something for someone else. Your thoughts maybe on I think your Discount Computers was that your first sort of major business? If you tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe your thoughts on where do you see the tech industry today?
Well, Discount Electronics was my second big hit. The first one was In Touch Telecom, and that was a telecommunications company that specialized in pagers. I don't know if you're old enough to remember what those are, but I'm no longer in the pager business. That was a pretty big business. We had a lot of stores all over the place, and it sort of morphed into Discount Electronics because we needed computers to work on these pagers, and then they were very hard to find back in the 90s. So, I started this company with the idea that computers needed to be affordable. That was the first goal, was to provide computers to small businesses that didn't cost $5,000. And that's pretty much where we were. There were thousands of dollars for a 386. So that was number one. And number two, as we got through this, we realized very quickly that if we weren't going to make these computers usable for somebody else, that they would end up in the landfill. And this is when the images were just starting to surface of these old used monitors full of mercury in landfills in China and everywhere else, and children playing them, and then how this tech was going to be a problem. It was being disposed of improperly. So the environment quickly became a very important part of that business, and how we handled even what we couldn't sell, and downstream providers, and making sure we took care of that stuff. But then when you fast forward to today, and I think the most important part of that company now is the people that work there. I got 28 employees, and half or more have been there a decade or more. I could probably walk into a room and find a few that have been there 20 years wherever we go. And that's what really counts in the end. You see people that have enjoyed their jobs, that do enjoy their jobs, and, could have ended up in some corporate cubicle somewhere. And that makes a difference, getting to know their families, the kids they have. Some of them met their spouses at work and that kind of stuff. That's a great part about having a business. It becomes like one really big family.
That's funny, because I met my spouse at work, and I used to teach at the university here 7 years. And one thing, it's kind of like what you say that impacted me a lot was in the way you became family, because you spent more time with your coworkers than your family. And when I go back now just to visit the campus, virtually everyone that was there during my time is gone. They've left, for different reasons, and it's kind of like sad, like that was an era, And well, you mentioned pagers. Yeah, I remember a few folks of my dad's friends having pagers out in Chicago. Yeah, you could do exploding pagers, right? That's the new thing. What about property? The real estate. You're working on that. CNBC published an article last week, saying you often you have to do the opposite of what the mainstream media tells you. They said don't buy property or gold. It's not good. And I'm thinking, like, literally the property in Mexico, the property market in 10 years has tripled. Gold has gone crazy. So it's just like, yeah, you want to buy gold and property. So what can you tell us about investing in real estate nationally as well as internationally?
Let's start when I was very young. As a matter, sometime in the 90s, I had walked into a bookstore back when those were still around. And at the end cap was this purple covered book by Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I just picked it up and thumbed through it. And I was like, wow. The first page I opened up to was like, this is amazing. I don't remember what was on that page, but it had me. And I was like, I bought that book and I headed home and I read the whole thing in a matter of day and a half. And I'm not a person who reads a lot of books. So I demolished that book, and then it's around here somewhere. It was like reference, it's just like, this seems really pretty straightforward. This is what I need to do. And if you hadn't read the book, it's an example of someone, two people, his real father and another man who was the father of a friend. And one of them didn't make a lot of money and the other did. And the one who made a lot of money spent it all on fancy clothes and trying to keep up the look. And the other was quietly investing in real estate and had a very secure future in the end. And Robert Kiyosaki explained the long-term benefits and how the value of the property compounds while you're earning rent on the property. You're building equity in it, and so I was hooked. I immediately started looking for stuff. It took me to secure my first property, but that was the reason I got started. And then as the book said, it wasn't easy, especially the first few. It was very difficult getting relationships with banks and, getting the financing done and then making the mortgage payments, of course, and all that stuff. And it grew and grew. And it was something that I did viciously for 20 years. That was my primary objective. I had other businesses, but they were all to fuel the real estate purchasing. That was my main objective, was that I wanted to someday retire. I wanted to be able to not work and have income. And I saw real estate as being the vehicle for that. And that's what got me motivated.
Do you see any? I mean, I see some people that talk about, oh, you shouldn't. I saw a tweet with some of these Latin American, these folks who sell these Latin American expat services, and one guy was saying, oh, you shouldn't buy, you should rent. And I just did the quick calculation. I paid off my home, but for the past 10 years, it's kind of like if I had been renting, what I paid in rent for the last 10 years would have effectively paid off my home, which I did. And now I have nothing to pay. Like it literally doesn't make sense. In some cases it can be, but I think broadly, and you know, many of the Croatian immigrants that I knew of my father's age or beyond, that came to Illinois in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they did exactly what the quote poor dad or did. They quietly bought. That was a different time. I don't think that can be replicated today. But they came as janitors, not speaking English, and then a few years pass, and they own a rental of 4 apartments, and then they own another, or you know, a rental of 10 or 20 apartments, and that was the way to go. And then Costa Rica. How does Costa Rica happen?
Well, when I was, gosh, I think this has been 35 years ago or more. I was in the car business, and there was a gentleman who used to floor plan cars, and that's floor plan is like a fancy word for loan shark. And he would pay for the cars that I would buy in my car lot, and then when I sold those cars, I'd pay him plus a whole bunch of interest. And one day he came to me, he says, "I heard of this country called Costa Rica. I think I want to retire there, but I don't want to drive around in Central America. I want you to drive me. I'll pay for your plane ticket and I'll cover all your expenses if you'll just come with me and drive me." I didn't even have to think about it for a minute. I was like, yeah, of course. I don't have a passport. Let me figure that part out. He even paid for the passport. So I went and got a passport. I got an international driver's license because I thought I needed one of those. And for the first time ever, I really left the country. I've been to Mexico before, but back then we didn't need a passport to go to Mexico. I just showed my Texas driver's license. You'd walk across the border. It was perfectly safe, and we'd go Christmas shopping there. But this was really my first trip out of the United States. And we rented an old Isuzu Trooper at the airport. Big piece of crud. I mean, just a very dangerous car. And we drove from San Jose to La Fortuna, San Carlos. And today that drive probably takes 3 hours. Back then it was 8 hours, and it was treacherous. I mean, you were taking your life in your own hands. And we made that drive. By the end of the drive, it had been pouring. You couldn't see much. It was dark. And we found this, can't even remember if we had a reservation or if we just found a place to stay, but it was raining so hard I couldn't see anything. And I got into the hotel room and just kind of worn out from the road and everything else, and went to sleep all night long, you know, just like dead sleep. Woke up in the morning to the birds, and it was just amazing to me. I walked out the door in the jungle, and it was like, this is absolutely amazing. And we went to the little restaurant in there, and I had the best food I'd ever had. And the woman who waited on us was so beautiful. And it was just like, it was like I was in a dream. And the time difference, half the year Costa Rica is on Texas time and half the time it's on Mountain time. And at this point in time, when we were on our trip, it was on Mountain time. And Dean, the guy who took me there, refused to change his watch. He was a very grumpy old man. So we lived on Texas time. Everything we did had to be on Texas time. It wasn't on Costa Rica time. And then breakfast came, and I was just like, all this fresh fruit and everything. And he sends his breakfast back, and he tells her in English, "This is not the way we cook eggs in Texas." And I was like, okay. So anyway, I had brought 3 disposable cameras with me because there was no digital camera back then. Anyway, I blew through all 3 cameras in the first 2 days, and I was absolutely in love with Costa Rica. And he wanted out of there. He wanted to end the trip early. He wanted to turn around. We were going to go all the way around Lake Arenal. He wanted to turn the car around and go back. And finally, we decided we'd just continue on with the journey and keep our original flight. They'd lost his luggage on the way there on top of everything else. So he's wearing these Pepe jeans that didn't fit real well. He was just an angry individual all the way around. And we left that trip. He decided he never wanted to come back to Costa Rica. He said, "I'll probably never even leave the United States again." And, I'm sure you know people like that. But I fell in love with that country. I couldn't believe there was any place like it. I still have pictures around my house somewhere that I took with that disposable camera and had them developed in panoramic where you could see the mountain ranges. And it was just so beautiful. And that's what started my love of Costa Rica, was that trip so many years ago.
And yeah, I've known, I think there are 2 types of Americans, and one, just as you describe. I mean, and not to insult the guy or anything. I mean, just how people are. But to say this is not how we do eggs in Texas, well, I mean, you're not in Texas, so you have to kind of like. And this is what this has been my principle. I've lived in half a dozen countries. I go to Mongolia, when I go to Kazakhstan, I don't want anything American. Let me see. I'll eat what they ate horse meat in Kazakhstan and Mongolia. I'm like, give me the horses or camels. So give me the camels. They drink a vodka straight, or like, let's take shots of vodka. This is how life is here. And so you're either one of these types of folks that is best you stay in the U.S., or you're one of the more other types of folks like yourself or myself who just want to explore. What are some broad thoughts for you on Latin America? Because there are listeners who are thinking of either they're snowbirds, they spend time in Latin America, or they are looking to expatriate, to leave the U.S. and to come to Mexico, Central America, South America, Costa Rica. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, I mean, my number one suggestion is check it out. A short, funny story about a woman at the hotel. I'm sitting at our hotel bar one day, and this woman pulls up, goes to reception, and while she's at reception, they start unloading her car, and she's got suitcase after suitcase after suitcase. It's 83 degrees there every day, and I'm like, wow, lady's got a lot of luggage. She comes from reception, comes over and sits down at the bar, and I said, so you moving here? And she goes, as a matter of fact, young man, I am. I said, wow, where are you moving? And she says, Capos, and it's pronounced Capos. I'm like, oh, really? You like it down there? She goes, don't know, never been. And it's like, oh, and you're moving there? She goes, yeah, I bought a house. I'm like, you bought a house in Capos and you've never been there? She goes, the internet is a wonderful thing. And I don't think she had any idea what she's in for. I love it down there. I really do. And most of my friends and family who come down there have learned to appreciate life in Central America, especially where I live up on a mountain outside. I'm not in a city or a big town. And, we don't have power a lot of the time. And, we usually have water, but there's always monkeys around and the view's always beautiful. And I love it there. Could I live there? No. I love air conditioning in Amazon, and I'm a realist, but I love spending a lot of time there. I can't, if I go more than 3 weeks without getting down to Costa Rica, I start to get itchy. It's a place where I can really connect, and it's everything. It's the people, it's the scenery, it's the culture, it's all of it together. Some of the most amazing people I know live in Costa Rica, and that helped me with one of the most recent parts of my life and a journey that I'm still undergoing. And some of it happened around COVID, but I'd come to the realization before that, where you meet people who have absolutely nothing and are some of the happiest people that you've ever met. And I think that in part got me thinking about my own life before I made a couple other revelations shortly thereafter, that I was trying to cross the wrong goal line. It's really enlightening to see them firsthand, to just see, not for somebody to tell you, oh, these people are happy and they don't have anything, but to see how happy they really are. And a lot of that, I believe, has to do with how close they are with their families. COVID was a great example. They already lived 4 people to a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. Well, when COVID came and nobody had any money, it was 8 or 9 people to a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and they were still happy. It was family time, and it was it's Pura Vida has a lot of meanings, but to me, it's just really it's a pure life, and I'm not saying it's completely without the technical distractions that we have in the United States. They face a lot of the same challenges that we have here, but there's a much deeper family connection there, and I think that family means more to them than it does to a lot of people in the U.S.
That is a huge point. I came across that in 2006 when I was in Mongolia, and I went back to Croatia with family, and it's the same story as you just gave for Costa Rica or Mongolia. And I'm living in a yurt in the desert in a village, and I was struck by how people didn't have much, but they were super happy and content, and they had everything they needed. They lived in a yurt, a tent. They had clothes. They had pets. They had a few of them had cars, others horses. I go back to Croatia, and one of my uncles says, so how is it like living out there with those, like in a demeaning fashion, with those poor Mongolians? And I just, in my head, I thought, oh boy, it's like, I'm thinking of the West. He didn't have issues in particular, but you hear a lot of people in the U.S. or Europe in the West, they got a lot of money, but they got a huge amount of problems, right? Depression, divorce. I mean, just go down the line, all kinds of psychological stress from working too much. And I'm like, well, I'd rather be happy in the Gobi than, have some of these problems in the West. By the way, Amazon, and this was 2006, I couldn't believe it. Amazon delivered stuff to my tent in the middle of nowhere in the Gobi Desert. So
Wow.
you can still, have your cake and eat it too. But thoughts on the climate today, because you've been doing this for decades now. How do you see sort of the state of the economy today? You've got Trump 2.0, the tariff war. Many countries are feeling the pain because it's the global situation that we find ourselves in. Western countries are just over indebted, and inflation. I'm seeing it from Mexico to U.S. to Europe. The housing, people are being priced out of owning homes increasingly. So how do you what's your pulse on the economy, as well as when it comes to opportunity and if someone wants to become an entrepreneur today?
As far as the economy and the state of the economy, I think it's going to shake itself out here in the short term. I think we've got a major housing crisis coming in the U.S. in the next 30 months. I think it'll probably be the biggest one I've seen in my life. There could be some things that could derail that. It may not happen, but if what is happening now continues to happen and we have the increase in inventory, number of days on market continue to increase, and the higher interest rates continue, which is a very real possibility. We've gotten so accustomed to having very low interest rates that I think you're going to find some people that are very upside down in their property, and we could have something that makes '09 look like a blip on the radar. The rest of the economy, I think, will probably do fine all through that. I think that we'll have a little bit of a hiccup and we'll move on down the road. And I think that that's probably more realistically in 2028, towards the end, maybe early 2029, that we start to get into the more serious part of that. Probably January or February of 2029, we see a really big, oh my gosh, here it comes. But I believe it'll be short-lived, at least as far as the markets are concerned. But right now, this is a very interesting time economically and opportunistically, because we're approaching a time where it's kind of like a reset. Anybody is going to be able to do anything they want to do here very shortly. You're going to need some initiative, but the opportunities are going to be abound like I've never seen in my life. And a lot of you hear these AI is coming, or this is going to happen. It's for a large part it's already here, but to me it's very reminiscent of 1999 with the internet, or maybe 98, maybe even a little earlier than that, where people were like, "Oh, the internet is coming," and some of us were already making use of it and seeing not what it could do today, but the potential was so obvious. What it would be able to do in the future was in your face in 1999. And now, of course, it's reality. And, it's just incredible what you can do with a computer in front of you. I mean, we're sitting here thousands of miles apart from each other, having a conversation over. I mean, if you went back in time, this is a pretty magical feat, right? And, the difference this time is that transition from 99 to now, 26 years, is going to be it's going to be sped up dramatically. This time between in 99 and where we are today, it's just take the internet as an example. That time will occur in 36 to 48 months from now. We will have moved what took us 25 years ago will take us 36 to 48 months from today. But it brings with it so many opportunities. It's every day there's something new, and we're making so many changes at all different levels in work. There's so many more opportunities with existing businesses to make them better, technology that's made things greater. And I believe that with this technological revelation, we're going to see better jobs. We're going to see, and it depends on how people treat it, but we should see an improved quality of life. But it's like anything else, how it's used is going to determine how it affects your life. I can remember seeing I think it was a front page of Time magazine, and it says, "This changes everything." And on the front page was the fax machine. And okay, that was a pretty cool invention, and I got one, and I thought this is really exciting. We don't have to overnight documents anymore. It's gonna and the talk like, oh, it's gonna put FedEx out of business, and all this stuff. And of course, none of that ever happened. And that's where we are now. Is like this is going to change everything. It's just probably not going to change it in the negative fashion that people tend to think it will. I think it's going to be great.
I was talking with someone this week about the podcast space, and now we're seeing people. One of my guests, he's a financial consultant, and he does a write up on finance stuff, and then he'll plug that into what is it, Google Notebook or something, and it'll generate two AI voices having a conversation based on his prompt or his and it's kind of cool, but that's not something I would really want to listen to, because we were discussing, what if AI now makes podcasting obsolete? But I think, people still want that human touch. People want to listen to Cultivating on Geopolitics and Empire, and not. So I don't think AI is going to do away with the podcast space or even Hollywood necessarily. They say soon you'll be able to type in a prompt, a plot for a film, and then it'll make the film for you. And I don't know. Some of us still want to see some of our favorite actors, on screen and all that. You've got a YouTube channel I was looking at, and you touch on this in your book. Things like just tips on living, cultivating happiness. Your latest YouTube was I actually very, very much enjoyed it. You talked about a morning stack, and you said whatever happens in the first hour of your day sets the stage for the entire day. And this is so true. I can remember I'll wake up one day and something went horribly wrong with my computer or something else, and the rest of my day is thrown off kilter, screwed. Or other days where I just wake up, everything's fine, get my coffee, the sun is shining, I'm feeling good. It's going to be a great day. And just thoughts that you have, maybe tips for people on living well.
Well, this is the next book, and it's all about happiness, and it all starts with this morning stack and what you do in the mornings, or sometimes more importantly, what you don't do. And one of the most important parts of this is techno fasting, and that just simply means to avoid using these gadgets. You start out in the morning, and you're full of alpha and theta waves, and you've got a really nice smooth transition into the day. And you pick up a phone, I don't know, to look at a stock quote or to get a bad email or just to get the light in your face. And all of a sudden you've flooded yourself with beta waves. And before your feet have even hit the floor, you're in misery. And if you can just let what happens naturally happen and stay away from gadgetry, don't turn the news on, even audio in the background, stay away from the computer, stay away from the phone, just for the first 2 hours of the day. Get outside, first thing you can, get some sunlight, help reinforce your circadian rhythm. Ground yourself, and then, take the day slowly, journal, meditate. And, we all have to live real lives. We're on the computer right now. The idea that we're not going to use a computer and that you can go live in the woods is fantasy land, right? So you just have to accept what it is that you need to do and then find the best ways to do it. I have one here. This is one of my favorite tricks. If I can dig it up, I have to hide it because the cat will destroy it. But when I'm going to use the computer, I use this. It's a 30-minute sand dial. So I'll make a list of the things that I'm going to do on the computer. And then I flip that upside down. And I don't just give myself the 30 minutes. I want as much sand left in that dial as I can possibly leave. And this keeps me on task. And I don't end up with some social media dopamine sucking death scroll or something. It's like, okay, I've got this much time to get the work done that I needed to do. The reason that I sat in this chair, because I also believe that not just the screen and using the technology and having all that blue light in your face is bad for you, but just sitting in a chair, it's not good for you. So I try to limit that amount of stuff throughout the day. I still get my work done. I have a lot of work to do. I've got 3 companies. I have to work a lot, but I take my phone calls standing up. I've been known to take Zoom calls walking around if I can, so there's a lot of things that we have in our control. And that's really where I'm going with this next book is about creating happiness all day long with just an hour to 2 hours in the morning. And I've been practicing it a long time. It works very well.
That is really good and important advice. And I'm sort of at the beginning of that journey of trying to reconfigure my life closer to what you're talking about. And I'm sure a number of people listening. Any thoughts on when the book might be out, or your next book?
It'll be on shelves by the end of the year at the latest.
All right, for Christmas, people can treat themselves or others. Any other thought, anything I haven't mentioned that you think is important, or final thought for us?
No, no, I think that if you're going to leave people with anything, it's that your past doesn't define you. You're in complete control of your life. Just don't stress too much about the past, and make the future what you want it to be.
Full steam ahead. Yeah, and don't let people hang your past over you or against you. I'm a very big believer in that. I've got Art of Manliness poster here in front of me. Rudyard Kipling's poem "If," which he talks about if you lose everything, in one game of pitch and toss, just without a breath, without muttering, just start anew. You've done that many times. So people, your links are in the description. People can check out your book and websites. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Rick.
Thank you very much for having me.